welcome to this panel on the secrets of early career funding success. My name is Tristan Baracco, and I'm the Assistant Vice President of Foundation Relations at Boston University. And I'm co-moderating this panel with my colleague, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Grotsky, and I'm the university's Vice President for Federal Relations. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Emily Burley, also Associate Director of Federal Relations.
So we are very pleased to have with us today 3 faculty members who have enjoyed a great deal of early career funding success. I'll very briefly introduce them, and then we'll get into the panel discussion. The first is Neil Ganem. He's Associate Professor of Pharmacology and Medicine. Dr. Ganem has received the Melanoma Research Alliance Young Investigator Award, the Smith Family Foundation Award for Excellence in Biomedical Research, and the American Cancer Society Research Scholar Award. He is also a Searle Scholar. Then we have Mo Khalil, Associate Professor of Biomedical Engineering. Dr. Khalil has received a PCASE, NIH New Innovator, DARPA Young Faculty, NSF Career, Hartwell Foundation Investigator Award, and Vannevar Bush Faculty Fellowship. And then finally, we have Laura Lewis, Assistant Professor, Laura Lewis and her son, Assistant Professor of Biomedical Engineering. Dr. Lewis has an NIH Pathway to Independence Award, One Mind Rising Star, and 1907 Trailblazer Award. And she is also a Pew Biomedical Scholar, Sloan Research Fellow, and Searle Scholar. So those are their bona fides. There's a lot of experience with early career funding in the room. So to start with, as I said, we'll hear from the 3 panelists who will share with us their insights regarding early career funding success. And we'll follow that by a moderated discussion on this topic. Then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A with the audience. And you can type your questions into the chat or just raise your hand at that point. And then we'll wrap things up with a very brief description of the types of grant-seeking resources available to you through the Offices of Federal Relations and Foundation Relations. So let's begin. And this one's for you, Neil. What advice would you give to early career grant seekers, especially in biomedical science, given where you sit, and also particularly foundation funding, because you've gotten quite a few of those?
Okay, sure. Well, thanks, Tristan. Thanks for inviting me to be here today. I hope all of you that are joining will at least get one pearl of wisdom from us today. So I want to start. I'm gonna give the first piece of advice, which is actually very simple, and that is to apply broadly. Right? There are many grant opportunities out there for new investigators. I mean, hundreds. When I first started looking way back when, I remember being shocked at how many grants were out there and how many grants are out there that I'd never even heard of. I think the key is you have to find them. Now BU will send you emails telling you about many of these grants, but BU is not going to know about everything. So you just have to keep searching. So I would advise you should sign up for these services like Pivot, which is a database that keeps track of grants and will let you know which ones you may be eligible for. But there's lots of other grants that aren't even on Pivot. So really the advice is just keep looking, always be doing Google searches, look for new grants that might be relevant to you in your area. Some tips here, I found some things that are useful is, whenever I read a paper, when I was a new investigator, I'd read a paper, I'd get to the end and I'd look at contributions, and I'd look at sources of support. And a lot of times I'd read the sources of support and I'd ask, geez, what are these new investigators? How are they being supported? What grants do they have? And oftentimes I'd find granting agencies in there that I'd never heard of, that weren't on Pivot, that you didn't know about. And then you could just fire off, do a Google search and just learn about those granting agencies. And you might find something that way. I also think it's good if you could, if you get your hands on somebody's CV, maybe somebody was applying for a job and you can see what grants they've received in the past, that's a good way to find out about grants that otherwise you might not know about. So the key is just find as many opportunities as possible. That's my big piece of advice here. You all know that some granting agencies are really popular, the ACS, the NSF, Pew, NIH. These places get hundreds of applications. And of course, because of that, they're extremely competitive. But the smaller foundations, these ones that can be hard to find, they often get far fewer candidates. And I've even heard from some foundations that sometimes they don't even get any candidates at all. They have these grants they want to give and there's nobody even applying for them. I mean, these are such small foundations. So they actually have to solicit people to apply for these grants. So I think it's really good to find these grants. A second point related to this is I think when you write a grant, you spend a lot of time and effort writing a good grant. Send it everywhere, right? You spent all that time writing the grant. I mean, just send it as many places as possible, places that fit, right? You might have to tailor it a little bit, but just send it out broadly. And I always say, what's the worst that can happen, right? You get 2 grants and you have to turn down 1 because of overlap or something. You know, that's not the worst situation in the world. And actually, as an aside, a lot of times, a lot of smaller granting agencies or foundations, they'll actually allow overlap. A lot of them like that your project is being supported with more money because it means there's a greater likelihood for success. You just need to be upfront about the overlap. The final point related to this, and then I'll let Mo and Laura speak, is I would say don't ignore these really small grants. I hear people say all the time, "Oh, there's a grant that I'm a good fit for, but it's only for $10,000 or $20,000. So what's the point?" And my philosophy on this is, look, money's money. And more importantly, I think grants beget grants. I think there's no question when a reviewer looks at your CV, if they see you already have received other grants, I think they feel that you're already sort of vetted, right? And I think that creates the impression in their mind that you're a stronger candidate. And I think it betters your chances of getting more grants. I've seen this over and over again. So I think it's really important to get grants, no matter how big or small, to get on your CV to sort of get the ball rolling. So I think I'll just give one of my major points here and I'll let the other 2 give some of their points and move on. But I would say that's a key thing. Just apply for sure, and find all the grants you possibly can apply to.
So, Neil, I can't help it. You've teed this up beautifully. We have a resource, Foundation Relations and Federal Relations. It's a list of 350 early career funding opportunities that we can tailor to individual faculty members' interests. It may not be totally comprehensive, but it's very. So I'll have more to say about that later.
Yeah.
Thank you for those comments. Mo, how about you? What are your tips, especially with federal, since you've had so much success there?
Okay, thanks, Tristan. Thanks, Jennifer. Good to see all these faces out there, and thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I'll build a little bit off of some of Neil's advice and comments, and I'll try to tailor towards federal to some extent. I actually interpreted this panel in kind of 2 different ways, so I'm just going to give kind of 2-part, wisdom or experience. The first kind of part is sort of just general guidance on how to kind of build your lab with funding. And then the second is really about early career awards, which is kind of more of what sort of Neil was getting at. And so maybe I'll just start with the kind of the general pieces, if that's okay. All right, so first piece of it, take everything we say with a grain of salt. Everyone's path and trajectory is a little bit different. And so there's no one size fits all. That's kind of number 1, all right? I received a piece of advice from my postdoctoral mentor early on, and he said to me, and this is going to be a little bit contrary to Neil's advice. He said, put your head down and kind of really develop your ideas and develop some preliminary data before launching into just kind of machine gunning grants and opportunities, right? Going after opportunities. And I think that, like, I took that advice to some degree. Because you can get into, especially with federal agencies, like when we're talking about NIH and things like that, you can get into unproductive loops where you're just constantly applying, but you don't have the backing, you don't have the ideas, you don't have the language, or you don't have the preliminary data to really kind of build upon. And so I think the moral of the story is, I think there's a balance between the sort of the amount of time and effort you put into grants with, like, actually getting kind of work and ideas fleshed out that will be good for some of these things. And so you have to find that balance. Everyone has a different balance on that. And so, but it's worth keeping in mind. And it kind of brings up a second point. I think planning and creating a timeline for these things for yourself is a really good idea. So as Neil mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities out there. And in fact, for many of these, they qualify early career investigators as very different things, right? Like, and so some of these opportunities, an early career person is someone between like years 1 and 2 of their, of their faculty position. And for others, they actually consider me still an early career, investigator. And I think that's laughable because I'm now 10 years in, right? But my point being that I think what Neil said is perfect. Like, go find all these opportunities, list them out, look at the criteria, and make an attack plan, like with a timeline, like which ones are sort of right for certain years of your faculty position. Okay. And I think that will help with this sort of notion of not just kind of machine gunning out proposals, very early on. And I think you can just kind of plan that out and sort of really tune that and pace it well. The thing that helped me out and my lab out kind of early on with funding before I was ready to go out and write, big grants and, individual grants was bridging with collaboration and writing, getting on to opportunities with other teams and other collaborative efforts. That was something that helped us out a lot and kind of bridged the time until we were ready to sort of write kind of bigger grants. So that's just something to consider, especially if your lab like ours is, collaborative in nature, develops tools, that sort of thing. Let's see. With respect to, let me sort of now transition a little bit to early career awards, and I'll deal with kind of both foundation, but federal. There are some things that you can control and some things that you cannot control. Okay, let me just say that first of all. The things that you can't always control, right, are that I think for many of these, like really prestigious early career awards, there's some factors that go into it, like the candidate's lineage, the scientific area, the stakeholders involved, like the people who review these, right, that are a little bit hard to control. And so sometimes those have a particular bias or, aesthetic, maybe is the best way to put it. And so those are some things that, like, I think is worth kind of like doing some research into and learning about, and then trying to like kind of aim at opportunities, foundations, whatever, that may be kind of better suited to you as a candidate. Because, for example, previous awardees looked like you, your scientific area is kind of aligned with some of the previous awardees, things like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. We can talk a little bit more about that. I'm happy to answer questions about it, what I think, what I've sort of observed for various opportunities. Most importantly, don't be discouraged. Neil is absolutely right. Apply broadly. If you even think that you're qualified and your area is, somewhat aligned and your research is aligned, just apply. You never really know. I certainly didn't realize or expect to be sort of an early career awardee across NIH, NSF, DoD, and Foundation. That was just, I couldn't have predicted that, right? And I think that just speaks to the idea of just, trying to kind of diversify there. There are many things that you can control, and I want to just make a note of a few of those things. And the first is your grantsmanship and your writing. And with respect to that, I think one thing to really keep in mind, especially for a lot of these early career awards, whether it's federal or foundation, the panels that review these are generally very diverse. They're not coming necessarily, unless we're talking about like what Neil was like, really focused foundations. Generally, the panels are quite diverse. They come from different areas of biomedical science or whatever. And so what that means is that when you write these things, take some time, really motivate your problem, write it in such a way that anyone from life science can understand the significance of your problem. If you shortchange that, they're not going to come on the ride with you, right? If you just write it in such a way that it's implicit that this problem is important, right? Or you try to sort of write a litany of the things that you've done, I think that's not going to work in general. You have to really motivate the significance of your problem to almost anyone in the life sciences. To that end, I think it is useful to talk to previous awardees and ask them if they're willing to share their proposals with you. Not everyone is, but some are. And I was fortunate to receive some of these from previous awardees. And that helped me a lot with just crafting language, thinking about kind of the scope of the proposal, thinking about how to write about myself, which is always really awkward, right? You have to, and for many of these, you have to write, it's not just the research, but it's about you, the candidate. And you may not have experience doing that. And so I think seeing some previous examples or templates can be quite useful. Yeah, I think that maybe I'll just pause there. I've given a lot there and we can kind of build on some of that.
So you've teed it up beautifully too, Mo. We also have a library of successful proposals. So I'll put that link in the chat in a few moments. Laura, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, that was great to hear. I certainly agree with all of those points. I guess, what can I add to all of this great info? I sort of think of there as being really kind of three main factors that influence a lot of these. And the first one is just luck. I mean, there's this huge randomness element to these awards. And so that kind of fits with this idea of like, you know, just try and don't be discouraged if things don't work out because there's this randomness you can't control. And then I think the other two that you actually can are, the first would be the way that you articulate the kind of big idea or big focus you want to communicate. And then the last would be the fit to the specific mechanism, because I think that the different foundations and the federal awards are looking for very different things. And so I can kind of give some practical sense of what I try to look for when I'm trying to figure out how to fit to a specific call. For the first one, for the big idea, I really liked how Mo was like, you need to explain upfront what the big problem is. I think a common feature along many of these early career awards is that the people who are reviewing them are unusually broad. And so they don't know what the big problem is in your area. And also, if what you're doing is a really new and interesting way to approach it, they don't know that either. And so I think that it's really useful to like just very explicitly write out like, here's why what I'm doing is this kind of important new insight or new approach that differs from what's been done in key ways, and this is why it's going to let us make progress. And I think you can be pretty like specific about that and avoiding jargon, because in general, I do find that these early career reviewers, you know, I'm in neuroscience, and, you know, I think that there's often a reviewer who's not a neuroscientist and who's really like needs additional kind of background from me to explain like, why is this important? What's different about this from what's been done? But then I think another big one is the fit. And so I find that the federal awards and the foundations are really, really different. And I think a proposal that does well at one will not do well at the other. So the federal awards, even the ones that say high risk, I think it's often not true. So federal awards do just expect you to do something that you've already shown you know how to do, that you have preliminary data to show that you can do it, and that your budget will cover every single piece of thing that you need to buy for it, and you're going to be able to do it in that amount of time. And then there's a group of foundation awards, which is often these big fellowships like the Searle and the Pew and the Sloan and ones like that, which are just the opposite. I think that for those, you actually have to propose something that you couldn't do in the amount of time that they cover, and you couldn't do with the amount of money that they give. And what they're hoping for is much more a sense of like, what's the vision for your lab? Where are you going over the next few years? Why is that an important direction to go in? And it's much less about technical detail and about feasibility. And then I think there's this other cluster of foundation awards that are much more kind of mission oriented. So yeah, just a second. So that are, for example, for a very specific disease, like for example, a mental health foundation that really is motivated to solve problems in mental health. And you can have the best in 2 minutes. You can have the best idea in the world, but if it's not a mental health idea and you're applying to a mental health foundation, you're really going to not be the right fit for them. So I think I might wrap up this here, but I just say pragmatically for this question of fit, often a really good thing to do is to just look at who got the award in the past few years, and then look at, for the foundations, look at who's on the like scientific advisory board, because that gives you a sense of who are the reviewers going to be for this proposal, what kinds of different fields do they come from, like is it all in your area, do you need to speak to a really broad group of biologists, and do they just tend to fund very basic biomedical work, or do they fund very applied translational clinical work? Because in general, they won't switch that up for one candidate. They tend to have their wheelhouse, and that's what they fund. So you want to make sure that you found one that's the right fit for your project.
Thank you, Delora. You're going above and
Right back.
beyond today. Mo and Neil, do you want to weigh in on anything that Laura said?
I would just echo, I mean, as Mo and Laura were speaking, it's almost like they were reading my bulleted points here. So we're on the same page. I also wanted to emphasize to know your audience. A lot of times foundations in particular will tell you exactly what they're looking for. For example, they might say they want it to be translational research. So if so, make sure you give them a translational research project, or they might say they want high risk, and give them a high risk project and then emphasize it. Come right out and say, this project is high risk because, that checks a box for these reviewers. They want to see that you're fitting what they're looking for. Mo and Laura both talked about looking at other people's grants. That is extremely helpful. I'll say that for some of the grants I've received, so for one in particular, it's the Searle, it's a big national grant. I've probably had 30 people or so from outside of BU email me and ask to see my grant, which it was surprising to me that people would be so bold, but it happened a lot. And I was more than happy to give them my grant. So, I don't think you should be shy about reaching out to your colleagues and saying, look, I'm applying for this thing. I see you got one. I'd love to see how you crafted your grant. I think most people will share that. So don't be shy about doing that. And Tristan said, we have a lot of these grants on file here, successful grants, but there might be grants you're applying for where you might be the first person from BU to ever be applying for it. So there might not be anything on file. So in that case, feel free to reach out to others, I would say. The other thing I want to point out is, and Laura was touching on this, it's important to know the foundation's goals. So to give you some tips here, I've noticed that a lot of foundations love recruiting talented researchers to their specific field. This is very common. So I think it's nice if you can, to let them know explicitly that you want to apply your expertise to a specific problem in their field. They just love that. And to give you an example, my lab, has developed these cool imaging tools. It doesn't really matter what they are. But I wrote a grant several years ago now to the Melanoma Research Alliance. And I basically said, I want to apply these imaging tools to the study of melanoma, even though studying melanoma is something I'd never done before, right? And I really emphasized that, look, I want to bring my tools, my talent to this field. And all of my reviewers loved that. They all mentioned it in their reviews. They all said, this is great. We're bringing somebody new into the melanoma field, which is one of their goals. And I really think that was one of the major reasons I got the grant. So if you can sell that part of you, do that for sure. Look, I'm talented. I bring a lot to the table, and now I'm going to bring it to your field. They really like that. The other tip I want to give you is a lot of these granting agencies, particularly the foundation grants or the smaller agencies, a lot of them judge their success by whether or not the people they fund end up getting R01s. That's actually really important to a lot of them. So I think it's very helpful to say right in your application how successful completion of the proposed aims is actually going to lead you to an R01 in that field. Again, reviewers love that. And so those are just a couple bulleted points I wanted to add.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, there was a couple nuggets in there from Neil and Laura that I'll build on. And one is, if you are considering applying to some of these opportunities, whether it's federal or foundation, as Neil said, don't be shy about reaching out to previous awardees, even ones that you don't know, and ask them for their insights and ask them for their proposals. Again, some may not be comfortable sharing, but I think you'll find the majority will. I can tell you that for each one of the ones that I won, I probably spent, hours or days, just talking with them about their experiences, both with applying, but also for some of these as a foundation award winner, you're kind of like part of a community, and you're sort of going to meetings and you're learning from the program officers and all of this. And there's a lot that you glean from that, right? That can be passed on to some of the future, potential candidates. One example of that is I was one of these Hartwell investigators, and their foundation is very interested in benefiting children's, the lives of children and human. And so I didn't think I had anything to say about this. But when I spoke with a previous awardee, they indicated that they're actually really excited about engineers who are developing new tools that could be potentially utilized for something in that space. And so really play up that you're trained as an engineer. And this is, and in fact, because this required an interview and an application and all of this. And that advice was actually right on. They really liked that component about my sort of application and candidacy. There's a different appetite for risk, for high risk, high reward across these. Laura, touched on that, and she kind of broke it down into the foundations and the federal. But I think there's even like subdivisions within each of those, and that's where I think looking at previous awardees and kind of even just the titles of their applications will give you some insights into that. I've had the fortune of winning sort of like NIH and NSF career, but also the DoD Young Faculty Award. And I can tell you, like, on the DoD side, they want the craziest stuff out there, right? And so you can actually propose really high risk, innovative things for which you really have no preliminary data for. That's a federal opportunity, but it's one in which you can take a lot of risk. And in fact, taking risk is important in those areas because they don't want to see things that are incremental at all. So I think, we can talk about all the different opportunities and kind of break them down, but I think you should do your homework there. And I think you should think about the subdivisions and the sort of appetite for risk across these, and play up to that if possible.
If I could jump in, each of you talked about looking at past award winners or even speaking to past award winners. What about program officers? So, I'm federal focused, so that's a lot. We often give that advice to talk to a program officer before you apply, and they can help guide you. Useful, not useful? What do you say about that? And maybe how do you approach a program officer?
I'll just quickly chime in, Jennifer. Yes, in many cases that has been very useful, at least for me, and I think that is useful when there's a chance, right? For some of these, there's just no point of contact, right? That's obvious, or when you apply to a new innovator award, right? It's just there's no real program. Then it gets kind of assigned later and all of that. But in some cases, it is useful. I can tell you that I think what helped me get the P case, which was channeled through my NSF career, was because I had a really good relationship with an NSF program officer who was very excited about the application of synthetic biology, my area, right, in various areas of biology, and so she worked hard to champion my application, right, for the P case. Had I not, reached out to her and formed a relationship with her, I don't know if that would have happened. So I think that there's a lot of examples of that. I'm sure Laura and Neil both have similar experiences there.
Yeah, what I'll say is that I know there's a lot of people out there, I know because I was one, who are afraid to reach out to program officers. They feel like they're just bothering them or taking up their time. There's this fear about doing it. And like I said, I used to be like that, but I can tell you every single time I've reached out to a program officer, it's been the greatest experience ever. These are genuinely the nicest people in the world, and they are there to help you. And they tell you right up front, I'm glad you reached out to me. It's my job to talk with you and help you get this grant. And so I would say, don't be afraid to reach out to the program officers. You're not putting them out by any means. And like Mo just said, a lot of times they can shepherd your grant through, especially if it's borderline. They can really help you a lot.
Yeah, the worst case scenario is you burn an hour, right? And it's not useful. The best case scenario is you get really interesting insights and nuggets into sort of what you should be amplifying in your proposal. So I definitely recommend it. If there's a person to contact or a person to reach out to or a connection, go make it. Mm-hmm.
I'd add also, I think it's true that, for a lot of these fellowship foundations and these big New Innovator Awards, there isn't really a program officer who's part of the decision processes, but there are things like the K99. I know there's a lot of postdocs here today, and for the K99, the program officers, it's totally normal to send them your specific aims, and they will give you feedback before you even submit your application. So that's extremely useful. They can help you, figure out if it's in scope for them, if that institute even wants to fund that type of project. So I think in that case, it can be really helpful. And like, like Mo just said, I mean, worst case, if it's a mechanism where it's not helpful, then, no problem. And if it was, then you just got a ton of useful information. But for the K99 type things, I think everybody should contact their PO.
So on the foundation side, we interact with program managers all the time at Foundation. So if you ever have any question about whom to reach out to or what to write, we're happy to help with that. And I imagine this similar situation on the federal side, Jennifer, with your team.
Yep.
So we're about halfway through the hour.
Sorry, Tristan,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add to that a little bit, sort of related. It deals with these foundation grants in particular, and a lot of these might not have program officers. I will say a lot of these foundation grants, especially some of the smaller ones, a lot of them are just started by families. They have an individual in their family that was affected by some sort of disease, and they've started this foundation to support research in that area. And a lot of times, I can think of one particular example for me where I applied for a foundation grant from one of these places. I got rejected, but I got the rejection email from the founder of the foundation, who was basically the father of a child who had died of a melanoma. And so I just wrote a nice letter back, thanking them for their time and support, and actually it's a real person on the other end, and I think they were grateful for that. And to be honest, the next year I applied again and I got the grant. And so I think these are real people, and so I think just being real with them, having a good communication with them goes a long way. And I'll say, if you do get grants, if you do get foundation grants from these places, keep them up to date. I mean, they want to know about your successes. Send them an email, tell them everything that's working. When you publish, make sure to cite them for sure. But I really think they're rooting for you. So I think it's good to keep them on your side, keep them happy.
You're singing our tune. So maybe now's a good time to go to Q&A. We have some questions in advance, but we are happy to take questions by chat or just by people raising their hands. And Jennifer, if you don't mind picking up from here.
So just a reminder to put things into the chat if folks have questions. I'm going to start with one that came in advance. And this question can go to all of our panelists, but how should one strategize about applying for an R03 and R21 on the road between a K award and an R award, right? So we get this a lot in federal relations, actually, people wondering about kind of, do I do the R21? Do I just go to an R01? What about an R03? What does it all mean? So I'm curious to hear from folks who lived it.
Personally, I don't recommend doing that. The R01 has a special boost for early stage investigators where you can get funded at a much lower pay line than the established investigators. You don't get that boost for things like the R21. It's almost as much work to write an R21, and it's so I think it does make focus that part on the R1, since that's the one where you also have an additional kind of
I think that's a really good point. I'll just chime in about the NIH, right? Early stage investigators do get an extra boost when it comes to scoring and kind of getting in. So that's something to, and as Mo mentioned earlier also too, like look at the timeline on that, right? What it looks like on NIH's website. They have a list for you to see if you fall on that timeline.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, oh, sorry, Mo. The minute you get an R01, you immediately become ineligible for many foundation grants and early career investigator grants. So sometimes the order of operations is important. Just keep that in mind as well.
I want to jump on both of those points. That's great. I have never been successful with an R21, and I just don't quite even understand the mechanism, because you hear conflicting things about preliminary data. It's almost just as much work to do an R01, and my personal advice is just to skip it and go right to the R01 stage. And as Laura said, if you happen to be an ESI, an early stage investigator, you preserve that because, for example, yeah, I don't know, you're eligible for that. You get the boost, right? Your R01 is going to be, at a different pay line. And so I think it's a much better mechanism, and frankly, obviously more money. There is an order of operation thing that Neil just mentioned that you have to, this is part of the kind of the general comment I made at the very beginning of sort of just trying to be somewhat strategic with a timeline and a plan for these things, because you might be thinking like, let's think about NIH for a second. You might be sort of in the mix on the new innovator, applying for the DP2, but while also applying for R01s, that's kind of something that happens. So just beware, like once you get the R01, you're all of a sudden ineligible for some of those things, including outside of NIH. So just be aware of that. And I think, that might inform the timing of when you apply to these, or even just, how to navigate them.
I'm just going to build on that. There is recently in the last year, I think NIGMS and others have, there's like the CATS Memorial Award, which is the R01 that does not require preliminary data. So I'm going to put that into the chat too. So just something else to think about. Actually, the comments that all of you raised, I think fit in really well with two of the questions we already have in the chat. So I'm going to go them in reversed order, but how to plan out grant applications as a new PI so you work at a sustainable pace. So let's talk about that. And then we've heard the new innovator talked about a couple of times, NIH new innovator. So when there's a question about that as well. So sustainability, pace, who wants to go first? Who's mastered that?
I was going to say, maybe I'm not the one to speak about pace here. I don't know. It's got the answer is going to be different for everybody. And so I can just tell you about my experience. My experience is that I came to BU with a K99. I was lucky to have one of these transition awards. And so I had sort of my first 2 years funded at BU. And so I didn't feel immediate pressure to write an R01. And again, going back to the order of operations, those first 2 years while I had the K99, I started applying for foundation grants first, because I knew I'd be ineligible once I got the R01. So I sort of relied on the K99, used that protected time to write for foundation grants, and then only applied for my R01 later. So I think it wasn't until year 3 or 4 that I actually started putting together my R01. So I actually had quite the ramp up time. And so I had a lot of time to develop preliminary data, publish even a paper from my own lab. And I think that helped my R01. So that was my way of doing it. There's other people that just come right in day one and just start putting the R01 together immediately. And they're successful too. So I don't know, I think that it's kind of hard to answer. It depends on your circumstance, I would say.
Yeah, pacing is important, and Neil's totally right. It's going to be very candidate, dependent. But I'll just reiterate I think it is important to pace yourself. I think you can burn out. I think you can write a lot and not focus on the ideas and the and doing the science. So just be somewhat aware of that. For me, somewhat like Neil, I had a ramp up because I came in with some collaborative grants and things like that was able to sort of keep the lab, afloat and kind of enlarge the lab, early on. I could write for limited submission things, smaller scale things, foundations, that sort of thing. And actually I was looking at my records right, and the first R01 I put in was 5 or 6 years later, from when I started. So, you don't have to, you don't necessarily have to go out for the sort of the kind of the big ones until several years in.
So, and sorry, that just reminded me to add to that just a little bit, for a lot of us, writing our R01, for some of us, that's maybe only the second grant we've ever written, or it's, maybe we wrote a PhD grant or something small, but a lot of times you're definitely still learning how to write a grant. And so I think if you start with some of these foundation grants, even if you get rejected, if there's any way you can get the reviewer comments, they're not always available, but if you can try and get those comments, you can kind of learn sort of on the fly what reviewers like and don't like. And so you can use that information as you ramp up towards your R01. So that's another benefit of writing for these foundation grants. If you apply for many of them, is you're sampling many different reviewers. You're sort of fine tuning your writing abilities. And I think that can be very useful, I would say, early on.
Yeah, just the one.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Laura. I was gonna say the one sort of caveat to that is with some of these kind of big early career things like the new innovator in particular, because the reviews come from a big, from across all of biomedicals. So take some of the reviews with a grain of salt. Like I can tell you, I was unsuccessful the first time I applied to it. I thought it was kind of the best grant I wrote, right, for that one. And of course, it didn't work out. But here were the comments, paraphrasing. Reviewer 1, this is a really innovative proposal. Reviewer 2, this is not innovative at all. I kid you not. These were really the comments back. And so how do you really sort of, take that and digest that? So anyway, don't be discouraged. Sometimes the reviews are, not helpful at idiosyncratic, and recycle the grant, recycle it. It's okay. Or just keep going.
I totally agree. And I think it's also really different for different people, depending on your field and depending on like the current financial situation of your lab and depending how expensive your experiments are. I have actually never gotten reviews back from any foundation grant I've applied for. So for me, there's something where you send it out into the void and then you just get it or you don't get it and there's no feedback whatsoever. So I actually applied for my R1 in year 2 because I felt like the comments you get are from that study section and you resubmit to that study section. And so I felt that was going to be very actionable feedback. But I did definitely not do it in the first year because it's not really worth putting in the R1 until you have enough preliminary data to kind of bolster the feasibility of it.
And what about just going back to the question about like having a plan and being sustainable, factoring in what Mo said, you're not going to get it on the first try. Like the National Science Foundation Career Awards, we tell people everyone does not get it on the first try, right? So you need to just look at the timing of that, how many years you're eligible, plan to submit, and then get rejected. And again, like, did you all sort of map that out as well?
If I'm being honest, I don't think I thought about it that carefully. Rookie mistakes. I think I wasn't thinking about rejections and timing it all out, if I'm being honest. I knew that when writing for the R01, I knew that success on the first try was very unlikely. So I knew it was going to take at least 2 attempts. And I knew that, it's not like it's a month between attempts. 2 attempts is you're over a year into it. So I was aware of that. So you have to, and everybody should be aware of that. If it's going to take you 2 or 3 shots to get an R1 or 4 shots or 5 shots, imagine it's 2 attempts per year. So, it's going to take some time. I think that's good to keep in mind, but I don't think I was thinking that clearly when I first started, to be honest.
Yeah, and to be clear, Jennifer, I mentioned kind of trying to develop a timeline and map, but all of that is like in hindsight, right? Advice that I wish I had, at the time. I went into it very naive. Like, Neil will probably have the same experience, but I look back at some of the first year proposals that I put together for foundations, and the ones that were unsuccessful, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense that was unsuccessful. That was not a good grant. Like it took some just maturation of like just grantsmanship and, just becoming a little more mature about how to write them and how to think about the science that I just wasn't quite ready for, right? And that includes like being somewhat strategic about timing and all this. Again, all this advice is really in hindsight.
I wanted to get to the NIH New Innovator question, but I know Laura had to step away. So why don't we do, Mo, you could talk about it a little bit. We'll jump down some other questions and maybe when she comes back, we'll hit her on that too.
So the question was,
sorry. The question, any specific advice about NIH New Innovator? We had a couple people ask about that, like what the secret sauce for that. So if you could just, get that solved for people, that would be great.
Yeah, I don't know if there's secret sauce. It's a little bit mysterious, but it's a really good mechanism. You should definitely apply for it if you're doing anything related to sort of biomedical science. If you look at the previous candidates that have won, they're really enriched quite a bit. Not exclusively, of course, but there's a lot that are involved in tool development and kind of, usually some sort of like tool development that's going to illuminate biology in a certain way, or that sort of thing. And so I think that plays well to a lot of people like our lab in particular. I applied at least twice. And as I said, the first time I applied, I got very unhelpful reviews back. And while that was sort of disappointing, I just sort of applied again the next year, and it went through. The way that the new innovator works is you write what they call an essay. I wouldn't really write it like an essay. They describe it as an essay. I would write it like, largely like a grant, right? I would sort of write it as, not necessarily aims, but like, here are the kind of the 3 areas or the 3 things that I want to do. And then there's like a little bit on you as the candidate, right? And it's a couple paragraphs about why you're an innovative investigator and that sort of thing. Then it's reviewed at one level by mail-in reviews. So they like send it out to a number of reviewers, and that's kind of phase 1. And if you make that phase, then they review it in a sort of, I think, a special study section or something like that. So it's kind of reviewed by two sets of people, right? And those, as I said before, are reviewers that really, come from lots of different areas, right? And so back to sort of what I was saying before, I think, and Laura, I think, really expounded upon this nicely. I think it's really important to very clearly state what is the significant problem what is the unmet biomedical need, the significant problem you're trying to address, and what is your new idea for addressing that. Really just right up front, make that clear. And you can take some risk with the new innovator in terms of your approach, right? They understand that you're a young investigator and you may not have preliminary data, that sort of thing. And I think you can be quite risky with that.
So, and I'm looking now, sorry, in the chat.
Yeah.
Previous data not required. Do you see it, Mo, the question? So the DP2 rules say
sorry,
that
I'm not looking at the chat at all.
I'll read it. Data is not required, but what about showing that you have at least tested the validity of your proposed methods and established initial collaborations that would help the project along? Would that help?
From my experience, yes. I don't know across the board, but certainly the proposal that was selected did have validation or preliminary data in that regard. Yeah, I think that's very useful.
What about advice for people about effective writing, and especially for people who are less comfortable writing or for whom English isn't a first language? What's some good writing advice that people have?
I'll start with this. I mean, the simple answer, of course, is just get as many people as possible to read your grants. That's the most important thing. What's actually really helpful to me is whenever I write a grant, I actually let all the people in my lab read it, all the PhD students, even the undergrads, everybody in the lab, which you'd think would be really common, but it's not. I mean, I think the majority of PIs don't like to actually share their grants with their lab members for whatever reason. I don't understand. I know when I was a PhD student and a postdoc, I never read any of my mentors' grants. They sort of like kept them to themselves for whatever reason. I think getting many people to read your grant, but especially people in the lab, because you'll have PhD students who might be first-year students who are just new to the field. And if they can understand it, then you've written it in a way that's accessible, right? So I think their feedback is oftentimes very useful. Because a first-year student, it might be similar to somebody on the study section who's more senior, but maybe not familiar with the field, right? So I think that's really useful, and it's obvious, right? But have as many people read it as possible and get feedback that way. Definitely the other benefit to having people in your lab read it is they can see your big vision, right? It's good for them. A lot of times people in the lab are thinking narrowly about their project and they're super focused. But if they see your grand vision, I think that helps inspire their projects as well. So I realize many of you on here might not have labs yet. So I guess it's maybe send it to colleagues maybe in similar but different fields to see if they understand the grant.
Yeah, I wanted to add a few things. I like what Neil just said there. There's a couple things related to that. It's obvious and it's annoying to say, start early, start really early and develop a really good just develop a very fleshed out outline. Like my process right now is to outline as much as possible aims and sub aims to the point where the outline has, you know, like each subaim and each, like what figure I'm imagining or what piece of preliminary data, you know, before I write anything at all. And I kind of wrestle with that process for like several weeks, and that will be at least a month or two before, you know, the proposal is due. Starting early really, really helps. And as Neil then said, especially for people, you know, who, you know, might be a little bit weaker on the writing, get to a draft early and just start circulating it and ask for edits and help and advice and all of this. There's some really great resources here at BU that can be helpful with that, or even just colleagues. I think you'll find that colleagues, if they have the time, will be very helpful with that. One thing I will say that I think is that people, that a lot of grant writers don't appreciate is that spend some time with your figures. So like nothing replaces the really good overview figure, and like spending some time and making sure that that overview figure like captures the grant and making it look both aesthetically pleasing, but like really obvious, like what's happening in this grant. You'd be surprised that like often elicits like good reactions from readers and reviewers, right? Also, like when you talk about sort of even data, you know, so sometimes like data is really hard to, like when their figures are really small and that sort of thing, it's really hard to, you know, figure out what's going on. So leave some time to rebuild your figures and get them so that they're obvious and easy to understand.
That's really good. We're, you know, kind of running out of time, but I'm asking one more question. This is about K awards. So people were asking about like, how do I decide? Do I do K99 RO? Like, do I just do a different kind of K award? What are your thoughts, folks, on K awards in general? And I know, Laura, you talked about, for example, like make sure you talk to a program officer if you're doing a K award. Do you have other kind of advice on that, on K awards in particular?
I think for people who are eligible for the K99, I mean, it gives incredible flexibility, but it has a very tight eligibility window. So that's the problem, is just timing. But for those who are, I think that's like everyone should apply for one if they're eligible, because the act of doing it also just helps you kind of think through your 5-year plan and get familiar with the NIH style. So that one I definitely encourage. I haven't personally been eligible for the other ones, so I won't speak to those, but maybe somebody else has feedback on the other K mechanisms.
I know Neil was mentioning he's on a study section right now at the National Cancer Institute.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, if you're eligible for K award, definitely apply, because if you get it, they're a significant amount of money. They don't affect your ESI status. I mean, they're a great grant to have. And to be honest, the reality is that a lot of institutions, if you want to get a position in academia, a lot of positions don't even hire you unless you have a K award. I mean, at Boston University School of Medicine, for the past 6 years, they were only recruiting people that had K awards. If you didn't have a K award, you weren't even eligible. I know Laura's opening her eyes. It's true. I mean, so they can be very important. It's not like that everywhere, but they're very important. What I'll say about the K awards is that you have to remember that these are training awards. That's really, really so important. You know, I'm on study section for these, and people sometimes write these beautiful grants with nice fleshed out specific aims and everything. But what's equally important as the grant with these K awards is the training plan. That's so important. You really need to let the reviewers know what kind of new training you're going to get. You can't just do the same old. So you want to write things like, you know, I have significant previous training in X, but now I want to develop new expertise in Y. I've written a detailed training plan to show how I'll acquire this new training. That's really critical. So really developing the training plan is important. And the way you can write a good training plan is, again, just by reading other people's K awards that were successful. That's really critical. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to turn it back to thank you all for answering the questions. I think we probably have more. And I know that each of you said you are willing to field questions if folks want to shoot you an email, et cetera. But I know Tristan wanted to briefly describe the resources that are available to all faculty in our offices. And Tristan, do you want me to just say, I can just put in the chat quickly for federal relations?
Yeah, that's great.
So our office, I'm going to put in the chat. We have a variety of primers on our website, which provide guides to different federal agencies. And there's also a primer specifically for early career opportunities if you want to take a look. And we are available to do one-on-one consultations with folks. So if you have a question, you can send a note to Emily or myself, and we would be happy to chat with you and think about sort of next steps in your career and what kind of things you might be eligible for. And then Tristan has a lot more formal.
So only slightly more. So I mentioned earlier on that we put together these early career roadmaps, and I'll just show you very quickly what it looks like. So this is piggybacking on some things that Mo and Neil were saying about casting a wide net. So we have a list of 350 programs that are geared to early career, and then we winnow this down to about 20 or so based on your research interests and your years of eligibility. So that's what's highlighted here in green. So you can see at a glance what programs you're eligible for and when, so you can map out when is a good time for you to apply. It usually is towards the end of your eligibility. So that's one tool that we provide. So just shoot me an email and we can get you set up with one of those. I'll put the email in the chat right now. The other one is the the successful proposal library. Some of our panelists have generously donated to it. So if you want to access that library, again, shoot me an email and we'll get you in. And if you end up getting proposals accepted, please donate them. We offer a wide range of support, connecting faculty with funders, helping with the actual writing of the proposals, and then handing off to OSP to get them submitted properly. So don't hesitate to avail yourself of these types of support. So I want to thank Mo, Neil, and Laura. You were great. A lot of good insight, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for attending. I appreciate the interest. And thank you, Jennifer, for co-moderating with me.
Thanks for leading it, Tristan.
Good to see you, Jennifer. Good to see you, Tristan. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Emily.
Bye.